No one at Mexico City's airport could believe what was about to happen. A little girl, barely 7 years old, with a torn dress and barefoot, had just whispered something in the ear of the most feared police dog in the entire terminal. And then the unthinkable happened. Kaiser, the Belgian shepherd who had bitten 3 officers the previous month, sat meekly facing south and began to cry. Officer Hernandez felt his blood rush to his chest. Kaiser, in his 5 years of service, had never allowed a civilian to approach within 3 meters, much less a child. Now this little vagrant was petting him like a pet dog, while the entire international airport stood frozen in shock. "Get away from him!" Hernandez yelled at them, but Kaiser growled menacingly when the girl didn't come, though her trainer did. It was as if the dog were protecting the little girl from the entire world, including the airport police, who began to surround them with weapons for no apparent reason. The little girl raised her enormous, tear-filled eyes and uttered 5 words that changed everything. "He knows where Daddy is." Kaiser wasn't a police officer. He had trained at the country's most rigorous military facilities, selected from among scientists for his controlled aggression and lethal instincts. His record was impeccable: 3 drug detection cases, 7 fugitive captures, and 3 counterterrorism operations. But everything changed exactly 8 months ago. Captain Mendoza, his first coach and only friend in the world, disappeared during a covert operation in Sinaloa. No one knew for sure what had happened. Official reports spoke of an ambush, of betrayal, of torture. His body was never found. And from that day on, Kaiser became an untamed beast. He tried everything: canine psychologists, specialized trainers, even some who claimed to be able to communicate with the animal's soul. Nothing worked. Kaiser attacked anyone who tried to approach, as if every human were responsible for Mendoza's death. I only worked with partial sedation, just enough for him to complete his rounds without harming anyone. Therefore, when Hernandez saw the girl walking directly toward Kaiser that November morning, he felt he was witnessing a death sentence. The dog was in its usual position, guarding the entrance to the international terminal, with that low, steady growl that kept everyone at a safe distance. But the girl didn't seem frightened. She walked, taking off her shoes on the cold marble of the airport, leaving small shadows of earth, for she had crossed the country by car to get there. Her flowered dress was so wet that it was impossible to distinguish its original colors. Her black hair, tangled and full of dry leaves, fell over her face, etched with hunger. "Girl, stop!" several officers shouted in unison, but she continued walking. Kaiser raised his head. His amber eyes gleamed at the sight of the small figure approaching. The muscles in his hind legs tensed, preparing for attack. His growls intensified, revealing legs covered by loose bulletproof vests. And then something unexpected happened. If I stopped 2 meters from the dog, I would slowly lift him up and extend my hand, palm facing the precipice. It wasn't a gesture to make him disappear, but a sign of recognition. "How exactly do you know how to communicate with him?" "I know you miss him," she whispered in a voice so low it could barely be heard over the noise of the airport. Kaiser stopped growling. For the first time in 8 months, the airport's most dangerous dog was completely still. His ears pricked back, taking in every nuance of the girl's voice. Something in those words, in that tone, had pierced all his defenses. The little boy took another step closer. The fighters were on the 2nd floor, waiting for orders. Hernandez had his finger on the trigger of his stun gun. Everyone held their breath. "My dad taught me your real name," the girl continued, now only a meter away from the dog. "No, Kaiser, your real name. That's what he knew." And then I said it, a word in German that Hernandez didn't understand, but he said that Kaiser had collapsed as if he'd been fired. The dog fell to the ground, trembling, and began to whimper in a way that broke his heart. It wasn't just physical pain, it was the sign of something much deeper. The little girl sat beside him and hugged him. Kaiser buried his enormous head in his small water bowl and cried like Hernandez had never seen an animal cry. Real tears streamed down his dark fur as the girl stroked him and murmured words of comfort. "It's okay, it's okay. Dad didn't abandon you. Dad would never abandon you." It was then that Hernandez noticed something that deeply moved him. The way the girl stroked the dog, the specific gesture behind its ears, the way she gently scratched the base of its back. It was identical to how Mendoza tried to calm the Kaiser after a difficult operation, exactly the same. "Who are you?" they asked, requesting that they approach with extreme caution. Kaiser raised his head and bared his teeth, but the girl placed her hand on the horse and the dog calmed down instantly. "My name is Elena," I replied without pausing to look at Kaiser. "Elena Mendoza." The airport seemed to have stopped. Hernandez felt like his legs were going to break. It was impossible. Mendoza had never mentioned his wife. In 5 years of working together, we never spoke like a family. His workdays were solitary, with no one under his supervision. "That can't be," murmured another agent. "We checked everything. Mendoza didn't have it." "Dad hid me," Elena interrupted, her voice thick with a sadness uncharacteristic of someone so young. "He thought his work was too dangerous, that the bad guys might use me to make me repent. That's why we lived apart. That's why we didn't know." Kaiser gently wiped the tears from the girl's face. It was clear she recognized her, that she knew exactly who she was. The bond between them was undeniable, forged at some point in the past that only they shared. "Where have you been?" Hernandez asked, noticing for the first time the obvious signs of neglect, the extreme thinness, the small scars on her arms, the look of someone who has seen too much. "Who cares about you?" Elena lowered her gaze. "Mrs. Rosa, Dad used to pay me to take care of her in Oaxaca. But when Dad stopped coming, she stopped receiving the money. And she told me the same thing." "How much time do you have?" "I don't know. Many moons. I walked like a lotus to get here. Dad tells me that if anything bad happened, he would come to the airport, that he was looking for the Kaiser, that he would protect me." The girl pulled something from the torn pocket of her dress. It was a crumpled and faded photograph, long since worn. It showed Mendoza in uniform, smiling broadly as he hugged a much smaller girl. To the south stood a young Kaiser, sharp-tongued and with an expression of utter happiness. "That was the day I was introduced to Kaiser," Elena explained. "I was 3 years old. Dad said Kaiser would be my secret guardian, that even if he couldn't be with me, Kaiser would always recognize me." Hernandez took the picture with the fearsome brothers. On the back, in Mendoza's unmistakable handwriting, was a zipper and a phrase: "My princess and her knight, always together even when I'm far away." The agent felt a lump in his throat. Everything began to make sense. The Kaiser's attacks after Mendoza's disappearance weren't just pain. They were frustration. The dog had been waiting, knowing that somewhere there was a girl who needed protection, but he couldn't find her. "Elena," Hernandez says in a low voice, "is your dad telling you anything about what you're doing, about your last mission?" The baby gradually calmed down. "I say you're going to catch some very bad men. You might be gone for a while. That's just how it is." I took out a small worn medal of St. Michael the Archangel. "I say he'll protect me until I get back." Kaiser sniffed the medal and chuckled. It was another familiar object, another link to his deceased coach. "Haven't you heard anything in the last 8 months?" Elena negotiated with herself, but stopped. A strange expression crossed her face, a mixture of fear and hope. "3 nights ago you had a winter," he whispered. "Dad was in a dark place. He was alive, but he looked very ugly. I told myself he was alive, that he had come looking for Kaiser, that Kaiser knew how to find him." Hernandez exchanged opinions with other officers. They all thought the same. The losses of a traumatized girl weren't obvious. But Kaiser's reaction to those words was hurtful. The dog jumped to its feet, completely alert, sniffing the air as if it had picked up an invisible scent. "It's impossible," someone murmured. 8 months have passed. If he were alive— "Dad is strong," Elena interrupted with unwavering conviction. "And he's ready. If he says he's alive, he's alive. Kaiser knows it. Isn't that right, Kaiser?" The dog barked once, a clear, sharp bark, the likes of which hadn't been heard since his trainer's disappearance. Then he started walking toward the airport exit, stopping every so often to look back, as if to make sure Elena was following him. "Wait," Hernandez says. "We can't just— Elena, are you sure your priest will help you in the fall?" The girl looked at him with those eyes he had seen too much for his age. "You didn't believe me. Nobody believed me. That's why I walked alone for so long. But Kaiser did believe me. You know where you are, Daddy." It was madness. The whole thing was complete madness. But Hernandez had worked with police officers long enough to know that his instincts rarely failed him. Kaiser's transformation was undeniable. The dog who had lived for months, always docile, now moved with purpose, with a strength he hadn't shown in a long time. "Captain," we called over the radio, "I need authorization for something unconventional." Captain Ramirez's voice crackled through the communicator. "How unconventional, Hernandez?" "We have a girl from Mendoza here. Yes, we didn't know she had a daughter. And Kaiser seems to think he can find Mendoza. I'm alive." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Hernandez thought he had lost the connection. "Mendoza's daughter?" Ramirez finally repeated. "Are you completely safe?" "Kaiser recognizes me, Captain. They're taking photographs of me. The girl tells me that Mendoza is talking to us, that he's alive. It's like sweating, but Kaiser was the best dog we had," Ramirez added. "And Mendoza was the best man. If there was even the slightest chance, Hernandez put together a team. Keep it low-key and stick with this dog." Elena had waited patiently throughout the conversation, her small hand clinging to Kaiser's neck. When Hernandez approached, he spoke before she could decide anything. "We have to go south. Kaiser knows the way. But there are men who barely watch us. That's why Dad can't escape. He's here." "How do you know all that?" The girl hugged her by the shoulders. "Dad told me, in the dream. I say I trusted the Kaiser and the officer who cries when I think no one loves him." Hernandez felt like she was bleeding. It was true. Since Mendoza's disappearance, she sometimes locked herself in the bathroom to cry over the loss of her best friend. But she never did it in front of anyone. It was impossible for the girl to get over it. "What else can you tell me, Father?" "That the place is blue. That there are black birds that never leave. And that from there you can see a mountain with 3 peaks." Elena closed her eyes as if remembering. "I say a name. The Raven. I say we'll be careful with the Raven." The name hit Hernandez like a punch to the gut. El Cuervo was a legend in drug trafficking circles, the ghost of a hitman who, they said, never missed, who could appear and disappear without a trace. If Mendoza had been captured by El Cuervo— "We need to act quickly," I say, taking his radio. "I need support units, no sirens, and someone to keep an eye on the sulfur mines within a 200-kilometer radius to the south." While organizing the rescue operation, Hernandez watched Elena and Kaiser. The girl whispered to the dog, and the animal responded with slight ear movements and saliva. It was as if they were having a conversation only they understood. "Ready to go get your dad?" I finally asked. Elena signed solemnly. "It's been on the list for 8 months. I just need to find Kaiser." They climbed into an unmarked armored truck. Kaiser jumped in first, something he hadn't done voluntarily in months. Elena followed, huddled next to the dog, which seemed to have tripled in size, as if it wanted to create a protective barrier around the girl. "Which way?" I asked the driver. Kaiser barked and pointed his snout south. It was behavior Hernandez had observed before, when the dog detected a particularly strong scent. But how could he track something after 8 months? They traveled in silence for about an hour. Elena had fallen asleep leaning against Kaiser's side, her little paw clinging to his fur. The dog remained alert, guiding the driver with occasional barks when they needed to change direction. As the city receded, the landscape changed. Buildings gave way to arid fields and rocky hills, and indeed to the south, mountains began to appear. "Hernandez," came the radio, its voice crackling with static. "We found 3 possible locations with abandoned sulfur mines. They're all to the south. I'll send you the coordinates." Kaiser abruptly interrupted, mentioning the coordinates, waking Elena. The dog began barking frantically, pointing east. "The second location is to the east," someone confirmed over the radio. "An abandoned mine on the slopes of Cerro de los Tres Hermanos." Elena opened her eyes. "3 peaks," he murmured. "Dad says 3 peaks." The convoy of vehicles changed direction. As they drew closer, Kaiser grew more nervous. It wasn't nervousness or fear, it was anticipation, like a soldier approaching his objective. "Something's wrong," Elena says suddenly. "Dad, I'm telling you, we were careful. That El Cuervo had dogs too, bad dogs." As if to confirm their words, they began to hear howls. In one of them, I uttered a cacophony of blood-choking noises. Kaiser growled in response, but it wasn't his usual aggressive growl. It was a calculated sound. Assessing the threat. "Up," Hernandez ordered. They were a few kilometers from the mine. "From here, we're going on foot. Team, we're heading west. I want snipers in these hills." They prepared in silence. Bulletproof vests, high-caliber weapons, night vision equipment even for daytime. Hernandez looked at Elena. "You'll fall here with Officer Martinez." "Node." The answer was immediate and emphatic. "Kaiser needs me, and Dad needs me. If I stay here, Kaiser won't be able to work properly. He protects me, but I also guide him." It was madness to take a child to a potential combat zone. But although Hernandez had his doubts, the Kaiser made the decision for everyone. Gently, he took Elena's sleeve between his teeth and began walking toward the mine. The message was clear. Wherever the child went, she would go. "That's fine," Hernandez sighed. "But you fall in the middle of the formation. At the first sign of danger, you throw yourself to the ground." They advanced in tactical formation. Kaiser led the way, followed by Elena and surrounded by armed officers. The terrain was difficult, full of heavy rocks and thorny bushes. But Elena walked with determination, her bare feet finding footing where the adults in boots bounced. The barking grew louder, and then they appeared. 5 mixed-breed dogs, their scars bearing the marks of brutal training. They spread out in a semicircle, blocking access to the mine entrance. Kaiser stopped. For a moment, Hernandez feared he would attack, starting a full-blown battle. But then the policeman did something extraordinary. He stood at full height, head and tail held high, and let out a single bark. It wasn't a challenge, it was a command. The dog keepers hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, it became clear who the true alpha was. One by one, the dogs began to retreat, ears lowered, acknowledging the Kaiser's superior authority. "Incredible," someone murmured. He subdued them without breaking a sweat. But Elena didn't seem surprised. "Kaiser is special. Dad decided that the other dogs should always know he's different. What a leader!" They continued advancing. The mine entrance was guarded by armed men who had no time to react before being taken down by snipers. The team moved with surgical precision, securing the perimeter. The interior of the mine was filled with sulfur and decaying matter. Makeshift torches cast dancing shadows on the walls. Kaiser led the way without hesitation. His steps were sure despite the darkness. And then you heard it. A faint moan, almost inaudible. Human. Kaiser accelerated, practically dragging Elena. They turned a corner, and there, in a makeshift cell with rusty rulers, was Captain Mendoza. Or what was left of him. He was unrecognizable. His beard was overgrown, his face disfigured, scars that spoke of unimaginable torture. But when I saw Kaiser and Elena, their eyes filled with tears. "My princess," he whispered hoarsely, "I knew you'd sell it. If I told Kaiser in my dreams, he said he found you." Elena ran toward the bars, her little brothers weaving between them to touch their priest. Kaiser howled, a broken sound of joy and pain as he tried to bite the beams. "Dad, Dad, you're alive! I knew you were alive!" Hernandez worked quickly at the compound while maintaining surveillance. The outgoing gunshots indicated that corrupt guards had been detected. They were short on time. "Mendoza," I say, struggling with the bars. "How many, son? Where's El Cuervo?" Mendoza tried to speak, but coughed up blood. "Betrayal from within. The Crow is—" An explosion rocked the mine. Someone had detonated charges to seal the entrance. The trap is closed. "Get out!" someone shouted over the radio. "The tunnels are collapsing!" Hernandez finally managed to open the cell. Mendoza collapsed, too weak to support himself. Kaiser immediately approached, allowing his former partner to lean on him. "No, leave me, Elena," Mendoza gasped. "The Crow, he was there. I always wanted him. That's why I hid him." They ran through the collapsed tunnels. Stones fell from the ceiling, and it was impossible to see the octopus. Elena guided her priest with one hand while clinging to Kaiser with the other. The dog navigated in the darkness by pure instinct, finding paths where there seemed to be no one. A figure appeared, blocking his path. Tall, dressed in black, with eyes that gleamed maliciously. The Raven. "Captain Mendoza," I said with a tone of acceptance. "I've been waiting for your daughter for months. I knew how late the premature baby would arrive. A father's love is so predictable." Kaiser attacked without warning, not with the blind fury of a beast, but with the calculated precision of a soldier. The Crow was swift, but Kaiser fell dead at his feet. The battle lasted seconds. "Let's go," Hernandez gasped, looking away from his mutilated body. "This place is falling apart." She stepped outside just as the main entrance collapsed. The medical team was waiting to leave, immediately taking Mendoza away. Elena wouldn't let go of his hand, refusing to be separated from him. "You'll be fine, Princess," Hernandez assured her. "Your father is strong. He made it, Kaiser, and your journey back." In the ambulance, while the doctors worked to stabilize Mendoza, Elena huddled between her priest and Kaiser. The dog, exhausted and covered in octopuses, kept a constant watch. "How did you suppose?" Hernandez asked in a low voice. "How did you think he was alive?" Elena looked at him with those ancient eyes in such a young face. "Because Kaiser never stopped looking for him. Every night he called, and I knew it wasn't out of sadness. It was a call. Dad heard and answered in due time. They're connected. Like Dad and you. Like Kaiser and you are now too." Mendoza survived. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital, recovering on land from the physical injuries he suffered after the trauma of 8 months in captivity. The investigation revealed a network of corruption that reached the highest levels. El Cuervo had been just a blessing in a much larger game, a game that had underestimated the bond between a man, his daughter, and his dog. Kaiser was never the same again, but not in a bad way. The aggressive beast was gone, replaced by a devoted guardian who divided his time between Mendoza and Elena. He officially retired from active duty, but unofficially remained the most respected member of the airport staff. Elena moved in with her priest openly for the first time. No more hiding, no more separations. The 3 of them formed an unconventional but unbreakable family. In the afternoons they could be seen in the park. Mendoza still walked with a cane. Elena laughed like the child she deserved to be. And Kaiser watched, always watching. They saved me. Mendoza said, looking at his daughter and his dog one by one, "On the floor of that cell, they saved me from losing hope." Hernandez visited them frequently. One day, while they were watching Elena play with Kaiser, Mendoza revealed the whole truth. "You knew they would come," I say softly. "In the worst moments, when the Crow tortured me for information about the operations, I clung to one certainty. Elena had a gift. She had inherited it from her mother. She could connect with souls, especially pure souls like Kaiser's. I knew she would find a way to communicate with me, and that Kaiser would hear her." A gift? Hernandez didn't know how to believe it. Mendoza smiled slightly. "How do you think a 7-year-old girl walked thousands of kilometers alone and survived? How can I even imagine what she said to the Kaiser?" As if she believed he was speaking to her, Elena ran towards her. Kaiser followed her, carrying in his mouth a small rubber ball that the girl had thrown. "Uncle Hernandez," I say with a smile, "Kaiser says he wants to thank you. He says he's grateful that you believed in us when he never did." Hernandez looked at the dog, who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. For a moment, he could have sworn Kaiser nodded slightly. "There's nothing to it, Champ," I replied, stroking Elena's fur. "Families take care of each other. You're part of the family." The story of Kaiser, Elena, and Mendoza became public at the airport. The new inmates listened to them with skepticism until they met them in person. There was something undeniable about the way they moved together, an invisible connection they shared. Psychologists came to study the case. Scientists wanted to examine the Kaiser. Journalists wanted an exclusive interview. But Mendoza turned them all down. Some miracles, of course, need no explanation. You simply have to experience them. One rainy afternoon, almost a year after the rescue, Elena sat on the porch with Kaiser. The rain soaked her as she read a book. It was a simple domestic scene, but for those who knew her story, it was an everyday miracle. "You know what, Kaiser?" Elena said suddenly. "I think Mom would be proud. We took care of ourselves the way she wanted." The dog gently licked his hand. Somewhere in the house, Mendoza was preparing the scene, singing a new song. The sound of normalcy after so much chaos. Hernandez, who had arrived at the scene, watched from the window. He couldn't quite believe everything that had happened in the past. But there was living proof. A family reunited against all odds. "What do you think?" Mendoza asked, appearing to the south. "Sometimes happy endings do exist. They just come in ways we don't expect." Mendoza sat there, watching his daughter and his dog. Love finds a way. It always finds a way. Elena teaches me that. Even when all seems lost, love finds a way to bring us back home. Kaiser barked softly, as if he had just arrived. In that moment, in that house filled with rediscovered love, everything was exactly as it should be. The story extended beyond the airport. Other police departments began paying closer attention to signs of trauma in their personnel. Protocols were created to maintain contact between police dogs and their handlers' families. Elena was invited to speak at conferences about the human-animal bond, always accompanied by Kaiser. But for Elena, nothing mattered as much as the quiet nights at home. When her father was at the door and Kaiser lay at the foot of her bed, her eternal guardian. When she could close her eyes without fear because her family was complete. One night, Mendoza asked, "Were you ever afraid it wouldn't work? Didn't Kaiser recognize you?" Elena puts her hands to her head. "Never. You taught me that true love is never forgotten. And Kaiser truly loves us. How much we love him." It was a simple yet profound wisdom. In a world full of complexities, sometimes the greatest truths are the oldest. Love recognizes love. The loyal call to the loyal. Sometimes, just sometimes, and that's enough to work miracles. Kaiser lived many more years, and Elena grew from a brave child into an extraordinary young woman. She never lost her protective instincts, but tempered them with the kindness she had been taught. In his final days, when the veterinarian said it was time, Elena was there, supporting him as she had always supported her. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear, "for taking care of Dad, for waiting for me, for teaching me that there is no distance that love cannot cross." Kaiser closed his eyes for the last time, his head submerged in Elena's water, in complete peace. He had fulfilled his most important mission, to reunite his family. They buried him in the garden, under the tree where he liked to rest. Mendoza planted flowers around him, Elena's mother's favorites. It was a closing of a cycle, a tribute to all the kinds of love that shaped their small, unconventional family. Elena grew up and became a veterinarian, specializing in trauma rescue dogs. Let us never forget Kaiser's lessons, that the deepest pain can be healed with patience and love, that true bonds transcend time and distance, and that sometimes heroes have 4 paws and enormous hearts. At her clinic, she took a photo, a barefoot girl, a police dog, and a uniformed man, all 3 looking at the camera with the same smile. Below, a simple sign: the family is not lost, they just need time to find each other again. On quiet nights, when Elena worked late caring for some inherited dog, she swore she could feel Kaiser's presence, guiding her as she had guided him. An eternal circle of love and protection that not even death could break. Because some stories don't truly end. They transform into legends, into inspiration, into a living experience that, even in the darkest moments, when all seems lost, love finds a way. You always find a way to bring us home. The rain pounded against the windows of the El Guardian Veterinary Clinic, a rhythmic sound Elena always remembered from that night in the sulfur mine. Now she was 20. Childhood malnutrition was behind her, replaced by athletic strength, but her eyes still reached that ancestral depth, that ability to see into souls that Mendoza had always believed was his master. The emergency phone rings at 2 a.m. "Dr. Mendoza?" The voice was serious, tense. Elena immediately recognized her friend. It was Commander Ramirez, the son of the captain who had authorized that suicide mission years before. Now he heads the canine unit. "Tell me, Ramirez, what is inherited?" Elena was putting on her gown, mentally reviewing the inventory of anesthetics and sutures. "It's not a physical legacy, Elena. We have a problem at the cargo port. It's a new dog, imported from the Czech Republic, Titan. He was supposed to replace our best trackers, but he's gone berserk. He has customs agents chained to a container. Protocol says we have to neutralize him if he doesn't calm down in 10 minutes. Elena felt a chill. Neutralize was a good word to end with. "Don't touch it," he ordered, grabbing his truck keys. "I'm coming over. And Ramirez, tell your men to lower their weapons. Fear will taint the gunpowder, and that will only make things worse." The port was a labyrinth of steel and shadows under the storm. Patrol lights spun, tinting the stacked containers blue and red. Elena got out of her vehicle, and the wind hit her face. "She's there," Ramirez pointed out, visibly relieved to see her. Elena looked up. On a stack of 3 containers, a black silhouette stood out against the lightning-lit sky. The dog barked, but it wasn't the rhythmic warning bark. It was a high-pitched, erratic sound, full of panic. "Tell me to color something," Elena murmured to herself, closing her eyes for a second to tune in, just as she had done with Kaiser. "Our sensors aren't detecting anything. The container is empty, Elena. It's a silly mistake. It's faulty." "There are no defective dogs, Ramirez, only dirty humans." Elena started climbing the side ladder of the container. The metal was slippery in the rain. "Elena, it's dangerous," shouted a young officer. "This animal weighs 40 kilos and has a bite of—" "Shh!" they called to her without looking back. Upon reaching the summit, Titan turned toward her. He was a working German shepherd, black, with wide open eyes, grumpy, pointing at the dead, and eager to jump. Elena heard the same thing she had heard 20 years earlier at the airport. "If I stop, I don't advance with control, I advance with presence." She slumped down onto the cold metal, ignoring the rain that soaked her clothes. "Nobody listens to you, do they?" I say in a soft but firm voice. "Everyone sees you, but they don't see what you're protecting." Titan stopped barking, although the growl persisted in his throat like a diesel engine. "I'm only listening to you," Elena continued, extending her hand with an open palm, that universal gesture Kaiser had taught her to perfect. "Talk to me. What's here?" The dog took a step toward her, sniffing the air. Then it whimpered and frantically scratched at the roof of the container on which it stood motionless. Elena approached slowly. I placed my hand on the rusted metal of the ceiling. "Keep cool." But Titan persisted, biting the corner of the container and grinding his teeth against the steel. "Ramirez," Elena shouted from downstairs, "open this container, now!" "It's empty, doctor. The thermal scanners are showing negative." "He says to open it," I shouted at the top of my lungs, following the order of my priest, Captain Mendoza. No one replied. The crane moved, lowering the container to the ground. The officers cut the security seals. The heavy doors creaked open. At first it seemed empty. There were only crates of farm machinery. But Titan leaped from high above, ignoring the impact with the ground, and ran down, ending up in a small space behind the wooden crates. He began to bark again, a bark that said, "Here, here." Elena ran after him. There, in a false bottom imperceptible to the scanners on top of the machinery, was a small covered ventilation piece. And behind the false wall, they found 6 children. They were unconscious from lack of oxygen, as cold as ice, which is why the thermal sensors failed. They were victims of the treatment. Chaos erupted. Paramedics, screams, sirens. But in the midst of it all, Elena sat on the floor of the heavy container. Titan, the defective and crazy dog, was licking one of the children's faces, trying to wake him up. Elena stroked the animal's head. Titan leaned against her, exhausted, releasing all the tension. "Good boy," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You're a good boy." The old captain. The next day at Mendoza's house, the air was thick with the aroma of coffee and a freshly brewed pot. Captain Mendoza, now in his 70s and with completely white hair, walked with difficulty due to arthritis, a consequence of the torture he had suffered in the mine. But his mind remained as sharp as a knife. Elena was sitting on the porch looking at the photo of Kaiser, which always presided over the room. "Avoid talking to him about last night," Mendoza says, sitting down with a soft cheese on the table. "Ramirez called me. Say you're a witch." Elena smiled and took a sip of coffee. "I just heard what no one wanted to hear, Dad, how you taught me." Mendoza turned his gaze towards the garden, where Kaiser was buried. "I wasn't the one who taught you that, daughter. He was." She pointed with her cane toward the flowering tree. "He taught you how to survive. He taught you how to feel." A comfortable silence reigns between them. "You know," Mendoza continued, "sometimes I think about the crow, about how we underestimated his loyalty. He believed that fear was the most powerful tool in the world, that it could break me, that it could scare you." "Fear acts quickly," Elena says thoughtfully, "but loyalty lasts longer." "Exactly. Titan, the dog last night, what are we going to do with him?" Elena sighed. "The police say you're too unstable. Although they were right this time, your temper is unpredictable. I want to give it to you from the bottom up." Mendoza raised an eyebrow. "What do you think?" I think you're coming home with us." The old captain let out a loud roar. "Just imagine! Well, Kaiser has plenty of room out there, and I need someone to make me walk this morning." The new guardian. Titan's rehabilitation was not easy. He did not possess Kaiser's innate stability. Titan had suffered abuse during his previous training in Europe. He distrusted men, feared evil spirits, and reacted violently to loud noises. But I had the best therapists in the world, an old man who survived hell and a woman who spoke the language of silences. For months, Elena worked with him. Use the infinite patience you had learned while waiting for your priest during those 8 months of solitude. "There's no power," Mendoza told her from the porch as Elena tried to put on the leash. "Let him choose you. Remember what you did with Kaiser. You didn't ask him to obey you. He offered you a deal." Deal. If you take care of me, I'll understand. One autumn afternoon, Elena was reviewing some files in the garden. If she had fallen asleep in bed, tired after a 24-hour shift. When I woke up, the sun was setting. She felt a weight on her legs. Titan stood facing the gate and the fence. His ears twitched like radar, scanning the perimeter. Seeing her wake up, the dog turned his head, picked up his gum, and gently placed it in Elena's lap. Not a bark, not a jump, just an amber gaze, very similar to the one he remembered from his childhood. Elena smiled and threw the ball. Titan ran after it, happy, free of his ghosts. The cycle closes. Years later, when Captain Mendoza finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, his funeral was one of the grandest the city had ever seen. Officials from all over the country came to pay their respects. Elena stood firm before the tomb, dressed in black. Don't be alone. To her right was Titan with the gray dog, and to her left Shadow, a dog that Titan had adopted and trained. As they lowered the box, Titan heard something that broke protocol and shocked everyone present. Approaching the edge of the ditch, he let out a low, deep groan and nearly fell on the old medal of St. Michael the Archangel, the very same medal Mendoza had given to Elena, and which Elena had given to her priest upon her return. Hernandez, now retired and with gray hair, approached Elena and hugged her. "Your priest would be proud, Elena. Look at all this. Look at what they've built." Elena looked around. There were police officers present. There were the families she had helped through her dog rescue foundation. There were the children, now adults, who had been found thanks to the dogs trained using her method. "He hasn't left, Uncle Hernandez," I tell Elena, placing a hand on Titan's head. "He just reinforced the perimeter." That night, Elena dreamed. In winter, I went back to the airport. I was 7 years old again. But I wasn't afraid, I wasn't cold, I wasn't scared. I walked through the terminal, bright and clean. There I saw 2 figures waiting for her. One was his priest, young and strong in his immaculate uniform. And seated to the south, with the majestic posture of an Egyptian sphinx, was the Kaiser. The dog barked, a bark of pure joy, and ran toward her. But when he arrived, Elena didn't feel the shock of a phantom dog. She felt real warmth, the smell of fur and earth, the rough tongue in her hand. "We're fine, Princess," Mendoza says under the sun, smiling. "The team is ready. Keep it up. We've got your back." Elena woke up with a feeling of absolute peace. Titan was asleep at the foot of her bed, snoring softly. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the photograph on the wall, the little girl, the priest, and the dog that had stopped everything. She got up, made herself a coffee, and went out onto the porch. I had a clinic to attend to, dogs to heal, and souls to reconnect. As she gazed at the 3-peaked mountain in the distance, Elena smiled. The story of the girl and the police dog ended long ago, but love is not final. It is an energy that is neither created nor destroyed. It only transforms into the next welcoming bark, the next bond that stirs. The next everyday miracle of a being who looks at you and tells you, without words, "You are not alone. I am with you." And for Elena Mendoza, that was enough for a lifetime.